In my last video, I installed an insulated ceiling to my new workshop, and in this one, I'm going to be creating a small loft area for a bit of additional storage space. I left a small opening in the ceiling, and later I'll be making a hatch for that. It's a little bit of a squeeze to get in and out, but the distance between the joists is what it is, and I'm only going to be putting smallish, not very heavy things up there anyway. It's advisable to get some sort of structural survey done to make sure that it's okay to add more weight to the roof joists, but I didn't. The way I see it, I've been climbing around up there like a monkey while I was installing insulation to the ceiling, and it felt really solid. So if it can take my considerable weight without any issues, I'm sure it'll be fine holding a few light boxes. So I'm okay with the risk, but if you're considering a similar project, I'd recommend doing things by the book. I'm just going to be boarding out the central area. It's relatively small, around 2.25 meters by 1.75 meters. First I added noggins either side of the hatch. I just used 2x3 CLS timber cut to size to fit in between the joists and secured it in place with screws. Then I got up there and measured up. I'm being very careful to only stand on the joists because the plasterboard and insulation areas will not take my weight, and obviously I don't want to fall 2.7 meters onto a concrete floor. That would not be good. You can see in the footage here that I've already screwed on a piece of timber to the two joists in the middle just to bring them up to the same height as the joists on either side of them so that the boards I install will sit on them evenly. It was also important to measure the size of the hatch because I wanted to make sure that whatever boards I cut will fit through it. I've been salvaging lots and lots of reclaimed plywood, OSB and MDF lately to use later as cladding for my internal walls. Most are 12mm or 1/4 inch thick, but I wanted to use thicker 18mm 3/4 inch material for the loft boards. I had a flick through and found one sheet of 18mm OSB which will be perfect. I made the cuts using my track saw, mainly because I don't have my table saw set up yet. Fitting the board through the hatch was fine, but as I lifted it, it was hitting the rafters at the top of my roof. Eventually though, I managed to wiggle and maneuver it in. I needed to make some cutouts to fit around the rafters, so I marked them up with a pencil, and then I measured how far I wanted the board to move back and marked that up too. I didn't want the hassle of getting this board back down through the hatch and then up again, so I decided to make the cuts while I was up there using my oscillating tool, being very careful not to cut into the joists. And it was a nice tight fit, so then I could secure it into the joists with screws. I also needed to be careful not to trap any of the electrical cables which are connected up to the lights on my ceiling under the boards. After that I could carry on marking up and cutting more OSB, and in this piece I'm making a cutout for where the loft hatch is. I found that I had just enough OSB to board the bit of the loft that I wanted to from one single 8x4 foot sheet, which was great because that's all the 18mm material that I had at the time to work with. But I did have to do the last area in two pieces. It would have been better as one piece, but no big deal as I could secure the edges of the boards to the joist that was in between. Next I wanted to add some material to the sides of the hatch just to tidy things up a little. I found the thinnest scraps of plywood that I could and cut some pieces to size using the track saw again. And to fit those, I just nailed them to the noggins and joists. Normally I'd use my cordless nailer for this, but I couldn't find it. Most of my tools are still in boxes. But in a way, the hammer is kind of a cordless nailer too. The scraps of plywood that I used for this don't match, but that doesn't matter because they're going to get painted later anyway, so it'll all blend in okay. Next I could start working on a lid for the hatch. I wanted to insulate it so that it wouldn't leak sound and heat, and originally I was thinking that I would put it on hinges, but because the lid would be quite thick by the time that two pieces of insulation were added to it, I figured it'd take up a lot of space when it was open, which would make the opening even more awkward to get in and out of. So I decided to make a lid that just lifts out instead. One problem I had was that the opening wasn't perfectly square. The edges were skewed slightly, probably because of the amateurish job I did at installing the plasterboard, but also not helped by some of the roof joists being slightly off too. The solution I came up with was to first cut a board of 12mm OSB slightly bigger than the opening by about 2 centimeters around the perimeter. I then found the center of the board by drawing an X with a straight edge from corner to corner. And that X would help me to get the board centered to the opening because I could measure and budge it around a little to get the distances equal on each side of the X. Once I was happy that it was sitting relatively central, next I cut some 18mm MDF to size to use as side panels for the lid. I then ran a bead of hot glue onto the edge and stuck it to the underside of the board, holding it in place for a few minutes until the glue set. I did the same on the opposite side too. Then I carefully removed the lid. I added a bit more hot glue to seal up and strengthen the joints a little. And then I could cut some more MDF for the shorter edges, and I scribed those and cut with the jigsaw for a perfect fit. I then offered up the lid to see if it would fit, and one of the edges was catching, so it wouldn't quite fit in place. So I used a block plane to remove some of the material where it was tight, and that completely solved the problem because the lid then fitted really nicely. Next I could add the insulation, and that was cut to size using a handsaw. Finally, I could use another piece of OSB for what would be a bottom panel for the lid, and I scribed that and cut with a jigsaw. I added some wood glue, and by this point I'd managed to find my cordless nailer, so I used that to secure it in place. And then rather than relying on the hot glue alone, I added some screws through the top panel into the MDF side panels just to strengthen it. I spent some time painting the bottom panel so that it would blend in nicely with the rest of the ceiling. And I did the same with the sides of the hatch too. I also added some sealant to the underside of the top panel, which probably won't really do much at all to be honest, but it seemed like a good idea at the time. And when the lid is in place, maybe it'll help seal any gaps a little, who knows. So what am I going to be storing in the loft? Things like toolboxes. I never really use these, but I don't really want to throw them away. And lots of these little bits that you get with tools when you buy them, mitre gauges that never fit the slots properly. Again, I don't want to throw these away, but I don't really want them taking up valuable space. A few old tools. It's useful to keep hold of these as backups just in case anything breaks, but hopefully I'll never have to resort to using these as they're old tools for a reason. And a box full of foam and fabric, which I'll probably use in future projects. And I'm sure there'll be more stuff to put up there once I finish sorting through boxes following our recent move. That's the loft finished, and I'm pretty happy with it. I'm not going to bother installing a loft ladder or a light because I doubt I'll go up there that much, and when I do want to go up there, I'll just use my normal ladder and one of my Hikoki battery operated lights. A few people have asked me if I've noticed a difference in sound from the nearby road noise, and to be honest, at the moment I can't really tell much of a difference. But I'm not worried because I think once I get the wall in front of the garage door up and get all of that insulated and sealed off, that's when I'll really start to notice the difference. And by the way, I have recorded some audio of the workshop before insulating, and I'll record some more audio after insulating, and then I can compare them in a video. Stay tuned for more on that. It took half a day to board out the space and less than half a day to make the hatch lid thing. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please subscribe for more weekly woodworking videos. You can also support the channel on Patreon if you'd like to receive early access to my videos, exclusive content, free plans and cut lists, and a name credit at the end of my videos. Thank you for watching.